Hello, welcome to another Energy Matters interview. I'm so pleased today to welcome my long-term friend and colleague, Judy Cohen, who is one of the most amazing brains I've ever encountered. Brilliant, brilliant woman, and I'm so excited, Judy, that you're here. Let me go ahead and just read your bio for a moment to give people a little bit of a sense of where you're coming from. She's a master's certified coach and is passionately committed to training co-active coaches and bringing co-activity into the world. She became totally deaf in 2007 due to her cancer treatments in 1999. Let me see. Now binaurally cochlear implanted, she hears normally once again. She listens to clients and students with the extraordinary skill, sensitivity, and depth she gained from retraining her brain to listen through her implants. She's passionately committed to training her hearing students to listen in the same way she now does. And I'll just add to that, I think that anybody who can listen the way Judy does and reflect that she does is this is a step up, especially for those of us who are coaches and trainers. Judy's also a T group facilitator at Stanford University Graduate School of Business. And for 3 years, she was the co-author of Coactive Training Institute's only advice column for coaches called Ask Judith. Judith has been no stranger to adversity in her adult life. She survived an armed sexual assault, cancer, and losing her hearing. Still, she has never lost her sense of humor or her ability to use stories as a way to heal herself and others. She's a master of turning shit into fertilizer and loves to help her clients reframe their stories so they can make whatever their circumstances are work for them. So, Judy, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to meet here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a story in and of itself.
It truly is. So, Judy, let's begin with energy. This is my Energy Matters program. How would you say energy? How do you think of it, and how do you use it in the work that you do?
So we've known each other a long time. And so you knew me in an earlier iteration of my life where I didn't know anything about energy and, in fact, didn't really believe in it. And I have to thank cancer initially because when your life is on the line, energy suddenly becomes very important.
Mm.
And then you and I started working together, and I learned how to pay attention to energy in a way that I never would have. And also, when I lost my hearing, I had to pay attention energetically because I couldn't hear. So I was suddenly aware kinesthetically of everything going on around me. And I don't know if you remember this. This one time we were working together and we were doing Qigong, and all of a sudden I said, "Stop." And you said, "What's the matter?" And I go, "My body's speaking to me. It's just not speaking English." And that changed my whole life. I understood energy in a completely different way after that.
Mm. So when you said that you began, one of the first things that you kind of began to deal with what is energy is when you had cancer. Can you say a little bit more about how and why, or how that came about? What did you recognize and how did you know?
So, before cancer, I always used to say I lived from here up, and I was very intellectually energetic and probably still am, but it all stopped here. And when I had cancer, again, I'm a little slow on the uptake about things, but after I got diagnosed, I suddenly, at 3 o'clock one morning, had this realization that is on the level of like, oh, you need to breathe to live. And that was that if my body died, my mind was going with it.
Mm,
It never viscerally occurred to me that they were connected. And
mm,
that was really the beginning of my healing, which is why, on some level, as much as I hated cancer, it healed me. Because before that, I was not aware of energy. I didn't pay attention to my feelings. And as we know, energy is emotions and all sorts of other things that we don't pay attention to unless we do. And it's such a change when you do pay attention to it, because not only is it enlivening, it smartens you up. it
Ah,
gives you resources that you never had access to before.
that's incredible. I love hearing that. Um, what do you feel like is the most important thing for people to know about how they use their energy? I mean, one of the things that you just said, I mean, is that sense of cancer become, the ways in which cancer had a gift embedded in it. And that's about the transformation of story. And that's also a transformation of energy. And I know that story is something you and I are both very interested in doing. Both of us teach stories in different ways. What do you feel like? How do you feel like stories and energy and transformation? Would you link those three together?
Yeah, so, in a way, it's almost hard for me to talk about it because it's so internalized in me now, it's so much a part. So, the metaphor is like teaching somebody to drive stick shift, so you have muscle memory. So, the good news is I have energetic memory now. But I think what happens is when, at least for me, when I was near death, I paid attention to everything because I was going to lose it all. And
Mhm.
I remember this one time a friend was driving me to chemo, and we were going over the Bay Bridge, and it was an incredibly beautiful day, and I was going to be late because there was traffic, but I wasn't sitting there going, "Oh my god, I'm gonna be late." I'm like, "I'm stuck on the Bay Bridge. The sun is shining. It is such a wonderful day."
Mm.
And I never would have noticed the sun. I never would have thought it was a good day. I would be complaining to myself about the traffic and how unfair it was, and it just changed my point of view. Everything I was looking at was totally different then. Now, I wish I can say it lasted for the rest of my long life, but it didn't. But I have to remind myself of that story.
Well,
Uh,
and it's in you, so it's something that you can go back to, right? When you then when you remember it, it probably brings you present again.
That just telling it right now. So here's a change of energy. It's not like I was in a low energy state to start with, but now I'm high again. So we are transmitting energy 24/7, whether we realize it or not. And I'm reminded of this because a while back, many years ago now, I had my colors done. And it was after I had cancer, but after I had my colors done, people said to me, "You look so healthy," and I'm like, "'Cause I'm not dying." But that wasn't what it was. I was wearing the correct colors, and even getting dressed today, I thought, "Now what color am I going to wear?"
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's energy, and you
Yes.
can unconsciously push people away, even though black might look good on somebody else. It is not a color I should wear near my face. I found that out.
Yeah, yeah, evidently that's true for most people, that black
Yeah.
under your face is not good. I resist it. I resist that notion, but I do know that it's true.
Unless you live in New
When I
York
was
where
a when I was
everybody
a
wears
kid
black.
when I was, in my teens, I was very dramatic, and so for a long period of time, I wore all black. I mean, partly I
Yeah.
was very influenced by Laura Nyro, who was, like, my twin in a way. We
Yes.
looked very much alike, and she was from New York, and she's half Italian, half Jewish. But anyway, I remember I was also in mourning for the world. So it's like this big drama.
It was appropriate for the time.
It was in the late 60s, early 70s. Anyway, I know that you're now you have considerable, over 30 years of experience as a coach and as a coach trainer, and you're an examiner for CTI. That this has been a lifelong passion. I mean, I remember when you were still a therapist and when you said, you know what, I want to become a coach. I remember that transition time for you. And one of the things that you're transitioning in right now is you're working now on looking at the importance of stories, what we tell ourselves. What is the story we tell ourselves, and how do we use that as transformational practice? So let's talk a little bit about stories and what's motivating you, and how did you come to this?
So as with most things in my life, it's from personal experience. And again, I have to credit cancer and losing my hearing and all sorts of other terrible things that happen for helping me see things as a story. And you and I were talking before, and I told you the story of what happened to me. So on Friday, and just as an example, so my tire blew out on Friday, and I was in a park, and there were a bunch of Hell's Angels type guys there. So I made up a story that I was very unsafe, and this was not going to be good, and my life was over with.
And that was really also, I mean, you have a sexual assault, a serious
Yeah,
sexual assault that was life-threatening. So it's not
right.
surprising
So
that you
it's
endured
not
it.
totally surprising, and I had called AAA and I'm thinking, thank God the AAA guy will save me. Well, the AAA guy got lost and wasn't helpful at all. And one of the Hells Angels got, and they weren't Hells Angels, there's some East Bay writing club. But one of the guys came over and he said, can I help you? And I go, well, I already called AAA. And he goes, they're terrible here. We can change your tire in 5 minutes. And I went, oh, okay. And they were the nicest guys. They couldn't help me enough. They gave me everything I needed and more. And I realized in the moment when I changed my story that I had scared myself for no reason at all. I mean, it was a stereotype. And I would have missed out on who these guys really were. And it was a healing experience for me because they were so kind. They couldn't do enough for me.
Hmm.
And and so now I have that positive story, and I will never think of a Hells Angel guys. Well, maybe I should, but I won't see them as dangerous again. So we all make up stories. And I mean, my favorite story to tell, which was a very painful story, was the day I got diagnosed with cancer. And the doctor said, I'm sorry to have to tell you. And I knew I was going to die right there. And in fact, I not only had one cancer diagnosis, I had two. They were having a sale that day, so I went for it. And but they were two very lethal diagnoses. And as of this point, so it's now 26 years later, I would say 95% of the women I was diagnosed with are dead. And
Mm,
I'm healthy and still here. So I thought, I'm going to die. It's all over with. And so I legitimately thought that. And so for about a month, I was upset and crazed. And then I said, well, maybe I only have a year to live. So I made up a new story. I'm going to make this the best year of my life. I am going to die happy. And I tried to do that, but it wasn't possible because my treatment was so hard and awful. So then I changed my story again and I said, there's no point in going through this suffering just for my benefit. I can't do that, but I can help other people.
mm,
So then, so now I was the guinea pig for everybody going through cancer treatment.
mm.
And little did I know that built my coaching practice.
How
That was
so? How did it do that?
so I was at the hospital and they knew me very well because I spent a lot of time there. And one of the nurses said to me, you know, people come to the sixth floor to die. You come here and you're like drumming up business. And I go, what are you talking about? I'm dying. And she goes, no, you're always talking about coaching and you're always talking about how much better it can be. And you could get clients here. And I went, oh my God, I never thought about that. So what was a life-threatening, horrendous experience suddenly became my business.
Wow. And so
And
did you work a lot then with people who have cancer, who had
I
cancer?
worked for about 4 or 5 years with only people who had cancer. Unfortunately, and I have to say it wasn't due to my coaching, they all died. And so I just have to put
Yeah,
that
because that
little
we wouldn't put that in your
disclaimer in
let's not
there.
put that in your marketing.
Yeah, I killed all of them. See, there was a lack of energy there. They just weren't committed.
God, no,
No,
no.
that was terrible. I didn't say that. But but speaking of energy, I mean, it was awful. I was really suffering because the grief is an energy too, and it really saps you. And, so I just decided I was in fact, my oncologist yelled at me. He said, "I told you not to work with cancer patients. They died." And I said, "But I didn't. I just assumed." He goes, "Well, you're unusual. You're not the regular cancer patient." So since then that's when I
It's
just
weird to have an oncologist say, "Don't work with cancer patients," right?
yeah, right. I go,
What's
"Your
wrong with that
patients
picture?
haven't." So, but anyway, that's when I really put focus on training coaches and then I lost my hearing, so then I had to learn to hear, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but I woke up one morning and I thought, "Oh my god, if I can teach myself to hear through my implants, anything is possible. I have rewired my brain."
Mm.
So, everything that I thought I couldn't do, I can just rewire my brain. And that's when stories started really happening for me because I had the story that I wasn't going to make it, life was hard, blah, blah, blah. And every time I changed my story, things got better.
Yeah, I think there's concept that whatever it is that we believe, we then our brains literally filter out things that won't support that belief. It only
Yes,
looks for things that will validate that belief. And so when you've changed your story, you're rewiring your brain, then all of a sudden you start to notice and feel and experience and attract different things.
right. Well, and you attract because you're paying attention to it.
Mm,
I used to say, if you pay attention, you'll gain interest.
mm, mm,
It's sort of like putting money in the bank. Or, when I went to buy a new car several years ago, I suddenly noticed all the hybrids on the road that I never paid attention to.
yeah, yeah,
And then I was like, wow, they're all over the place. Who knew? And I'm
yeah.
not looking for a car now, so I don't notice any hybrids.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so this rewiring and of your brain and that how that intersects with what the story is that you tell about yourself. I know that this is a new program that you're actually starting that's been some time in development. Let's talk a little bit about what this program is that you have coming up.
Yeah, I'm really proud of it and I'm really excited about it. And in a way, it takes my own experience and puts it to good use, which is another story. I always say there's no point in having a tragedy happen if you can't make it work for you or help other people. So
Mm,
that's partially where this is coming from. The other place it's coming from is when I was a therapist, I used to do narrative therapy, and that's basically about changing your story. But they also look at the characters in the story, they look at all sorts of things. So, what I have done is taken a narrative approach to people's stories, and for 6 weeks, we're going to look at each different part of narrative creation. So the first one is about story in general and the power of one story. The second week is about characters. And, a lot of people are not the main character of their own story, and that creates problems. So,
mm,
but to find out who your other characters are, who are people supporting you and who are not. Third week is how to move the plot forward. It's very easy in our stories to get stuck. And so this will be ways not to get stuck. Then you can't have a good story without conflict. If I say I got up this morning and the sun is shining and I went to bed tonight, that is a very boring story. But if I got up this morning and I had this terrible thing happen to me, and now we have some interest and we have conflict. And our brains actually love to figure these things out as much
mm,
as we resist them. They really love it. So the fifth week is how exactly to reframe your story, which I actually think is fun. It's really about being creative and using a sense of humor and even being totally crazy in a way, where you're putting things together that would never go together. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this is really good. I never thought about that before. And the final week is, depending on how you want to use this, we'll come up with your signature story, and you could use it either to generate more clients or to inspire yourself about whatever your life purpose is, or both for that matter.
Mm. So who are you gearing this for?
It's primarily for coaches, but anybody in the helping profession, anybody who has to listen to stories,
Mm.
which means all of us.
Mhm.
Um, or if you're having a hard time with a story that you're stuck on right now, this will teach you how to work with it. But it's in a way, it's a two for the price of one thing, because if you're a coach, we'll use your story right now to learn how to do it, and then you can practice on your clients
Mm.
or practice on you and use it on your clients.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
practice on your clients.
So when you were when this was formulating, what was the primary motivation for you? What was the energy behind the creation of this new program that you've developed?
So, I have to admit, I never, said this out loud to myself because it seemed too grandiose, but the reason for everything I do is to decrease suffering in the world.
Mm.
That's it. Because I know how much I suffered with stories that A, were not true, and B, were not helpful. And
Mhm.
we all generate those stories all the time. I also know the other side. There's a certain sense of self-efficacy that no matter how bad things get, either in my own life or in the world, I know I can change my interpretation of what that is, and that changes the story, and that lets me survive, literally.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really, really powerful. What do you hope for people what do you hope for people to understand about their own stories?
Um What's his name? Richard Schwartz, who developed, internal family systems. The title of, I think it's his latest book, he goes, "There are no bad, parts. There are no bad stories.
Mhm.
Every story can be changed, maybe not totally, the circumstances may not change, but you can always change your interpretation of that story, and I have been literally twice in life and death situations where I had to change a story. I lost my hearing, that was a real story change for me, and then there are lesser things like, I broke a bone in my foot a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, "Oh, how can I make this work for me?"
Mhm.
So, I still have a broken bone, but I'm not bitching about it now.
Well, I really love this because I mean, for me, I talk a lot in my work about compost and being able, as you said, to put shit into turn shit into fertilizer. It's a metaphor I've used forever around how I think energy works, particularly when we're talking about heaven, human, and earth and qigong, and the earth realm being the place where transformation can really happen. In fact, I'm thinking about I'm going to be doing a two-part series on composting, what I'm calling emotional compost, creating tools basically to navigate difficult or challenging times. And it's this so what you're talking about feels so much like my language and so much I'm right in alignment with you and so excited that you're going to be doing this. Now I know you're going to be doing a couple of I think free
Free 1 hour sessions,
webinars.
and
Yeah, let's talk.
I apologize, I have to get my calendar out again.
Actually, I have the dates
Oh,
in
good.
front of me. I'm gonna pull them up right now. We have one on July 3rd at 11 a.m. Pacific and one on July 8th at noon Pacific. And so, what will you be doing in these two different webinars?
So we'll be talking about stories, and depending on who shows up, we'll be working with some stories to see how to reframe them and to see the power of a story. Not every story needs to be reframed. Some stories need to actually just be heard.
That's right.
And that's
Yes.
the other thing I learned from being deaf. I learned how to listen. And so often when we hear the same story over and over again, we're not listening, especially to the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and we're not really hearing the story under the story. There's always a story under the
Exactly.
story, right? And so that's part of how we can inform the reframe that you're talking about. This, and so you're going to be working with people on, so you'll be introducing people to some of how they might work to be able to change their story, whether they're stuck in the
Exactly.
story or they're
Please do that.
beautiful. So I have one more question, which is, how would you say that being deaf, and I know you were hard of hearing as a kid and then actually went totally deaf after chemo. How would you've often talked about being deaf has helped you listen better, hear better. Um, how has that worked? How has being deaf helped you to be a better listener?
So anybody who's lost a sense, whether it's eyesight or hearing or any other sense, compensates. And so I have compensated by using my eyes. And, so much so that when I finally did get implanted, I was so used to looking ahead of me and reading lips that I couldn't hear anything behind me, and I called the audiologist and said, "It's not working, I can't hear anything behind me," and she said, "You have to learn to put your attention behind you the way you used to do when you could hear." And you didn't think about it. So now you have to be conscious about everything until it becomes unconscious again.
Mm,
So that's the bottom line. I had to be conscious. I also had to do what I called um, conceptual listening. So if we're talking about a topic, I had to think about the whole concept and not just the actual specific words, but what was the atmosphere around it? What was there's another word that starts with C that context, contextual listening. So I had to be aware of that. And then when I was faking being able to hear, because it took me a long time to admit to myself that I couldn't totally hear, um, I had to read people's energy. I had to read their facial expressions. I had to read the energy around them. And sometimes I could not hear what they were saying, but I heard, and I'd say, "So you sound really angry." I had no idea what they were saying, but I knew they were angry and they were like, "Yes." I'd be like, "Okay, how can you express that anger in a different way?" And I faked it, but I learned over time to really pay attention in ways that I never could before because I didn't spend time listening at that depth. And I also realized that when I thought I was listening to the story I was making up in my head, which sometimes had nothing to do with what people were saying.
mm,
And that was a huge listening.
mm,
I
beautiful.
mean, I would love it if everybody knew how to reframe their story. That would change the world completely.
Yes. So to find out more about this or to connect with you directly to hear about the program that's I know you're beginning that on July 10th, people can reach you at Judy or Judith.
Judy at coachjudithcohen.com.
Great. And so we'll put that in the chat underneath too.
And if you write me there, I'll send you the link both to both of the free sessions.
Wonderful. That's perfect. Well, Judy, do you have any final thoughts that you have about energy or about storytelling or anything else?
They all go together. Stories hold so much energy and they're gifts. They're like a gift of energy. Every time you tell a story, you're giving such an intimate personal gift. And every time you receive a story, the same thing is happening. So this is actually spiritual work. You may just think, oh, well, I went to the store and blah, blah, blah happened. But we're sharing energy. We're creating intimacy. We're creating peace in the best possible way when we can receive each other's stories.
which is part of what happened when you were at the park and these men who seemed
Exactly.
threatening turned out to be incredible gifts or angels in disguise. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much, Judy, for your time. This has been
Thank you for having me.
it's been a pleasure. All right. So, folks, go ahead and follow up with Judy if you're interested in hearing more about my composting workshop. These things would actually lead really well one into the other. So, contact me here on this Facebook page or through my email, which I'll put in the notes. I just loved having you here, Judy. Thank you again. And till next time, be well and let the chi flow. Bye bye.